you all still shined. I've heard that Diana Ross actually kicked you off of her tour because you were still in the Thunder. Is that true? What happened? We want all the juice today. She's like, come on.
That did happen.
That's true.
Yeah.
Wow.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
What really happened between Gladys Knight and Diana Ross? Was it rivalry, betrayal, or just the cost of surviving in the cutthroat world of music? In this video, we'll uncover the slights, the secrets, and the simmering tension that turned friendship into feud. Why did Diana Ross, at the height of her fame, push Gladys Knight and the Pips off her tour? And after all these years, why does Gladys still feel the need to set the record straight? Hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready. Because what you're about to hear will change the way you see two of music's greatest legends. Let's dive into the untold story behind Gladys Knight's confession. Diana Ross kicked Gladys Knight and the Pips off tour? When asked in an interview if it was true that Diana Ross kicked her off a tour for stealing the spotlight, Gladys Knight didn't hesitate. "That's true," she said. It was a rare glimpse into the lengths Diana Ross, one of the most celebrated performers of her era, was willing to go to protect her shine. Gladys described how tense things became backstage. Everyone, Gladys, the Pips, the band, shared a single dressing room, while Ross and the Supremes had their own lined up, waiting. There was constant friction whenever anyone tried to move them out to make room for Ross's crew, and while many might think the Supremes were spared Ross's harsh treatment, Gladys hinted that they, too, endured it quietly. "We were taught at home never to air your laundry in public," she recalled. But behind the scenes, people stopped addressing Florence Ballard and Mary Wilson, directing everything to Diana. Gladys later learned they'd been instructed to do so. For years, Diana Ross's image has been that of a flawless star, a voice, a style, a presence that defined generations. But Gladys Knight, with her own rich history of sharing stages and moments with Ross, now believes it's time to share another side of the story. Gladys's experience wasn't just shaped by the music industry. She had many close interactions with Ross, both on and off the stage, and if anyone could paint a fuller, truer picture of Diana Ross, Gladys is certainly among them. While no one denies that Ross is one of the greatest performers to ever grace a stage, Gladys's account, and that of others who worked with Ross, reveals a more complicated figure. Former band members and colleagues spoke of Ross's controlling nature, her tendency to micromanage, and a relentless drive that sometimes crossed the line. Allegedly, Ross's ambition led her to sideline her own bandmates, believing she deserved to stand above the rest. And some say she didn't hesitate to use personal connections to get ahead, doing whatever it took to stay in the spotlight. The truth is, no one really knows why Diana Ross pursued certain relationships during her rise to fame. But what's clear is that those connections seem to help her secure the spotlight, often at the expense of her fellow group members. These lesser-known parts of Diana Ross's story are what Gladys Knight now believes the world deserves to hear. And Gladys isn't speaking up based solely on her own experiences. Over the years, many others who crossed paths with Ross have shared accounts that point to a more complex, and at times, darker side of the star, a side that played a part in her climb to wealth and fame. Fans may have heard bits and pieces of these stories. But what sets Gladys's perspective apart is how much more there is beneath the surface, stories that never made the headlines, stories that might change how people see the legend. "She could be a little snooty," Gladys once remarked. Especially Diana. In the world of entertainment, few names shine as brightly as Gladys Knight and Diana Ross. For millennials, these women need no introduction. But for Gen Z and younger generations who may not fully grasp their impact, it's worth stepping back for a moment. Let's start with Gladys Knight. Gladys Knight spent most of her life in the music industry, and over the decades, she became a shining example of what true artistry looks like. She was incredibly talented and dedicated years to perfecting her craft. But as anyone who's been in the business knows, the music world can be tough. There's constant pressure to stay relevant, fulfill contracts, and ride out the inevitable highs and lows. And yet, through it all, Gladys managed to stay at the top for more than 40 years, a remarkable feat by any measure. Like Knight, Diana Ross also kept her career burning bright for decades. In fact, some might say her star burned even brighter at times. By the numbers alone, Ross's success is staggering. According to the Detroit Historical Society, she sold over 100 million records, recorded 57 albums, and stacked up countless #1 hits and awards. But somewhere along the way, it seemed that success may have gone to her head and perhaps revealed a darker side. Diana's story began humbly enough. She started singing in school, joining a group of neighborhood girls to form an all-female counterpart to the local boys group, the Primes. Their talent caught the eye of Smokey Robinson, who helped them land a recording contract. From there, Ross charged forward, but not everyone kept up. Florence Ballard and Mary Wilson, the other Supremes, later spoke of a Ross who always seemed determined to stand apart. Whether it was choosing to stand on the opposite side of the stage or backing out of their matching costumes at the last second, Diana seemed focused on setting herself apart. And those legendary rumors? They weren't just whispers about group dynamics. Stories of Ross's difficult behavior extended beyond the Supremes. Many others who worked alongside her felt that same tension. Today, it's Gladys Knight who's chosen to finally speak openly about the tension that once brewed behind the scenes. Knight, truly in a league of her own when it comes to music legends, has shared stages with some of the greatest names of her time, including the Supremes. But not all those moments were as glamorous as they appeared. A few years ago, the Empress of Soul revealed a story that many fans had only heard whispers about, the time Diana Ross had her and the Pips kicked off a tour. Gladys Knight and her family formed their group in the 1950s when she was just a young girl. In the early days, the Pips signed with Fury Records and toured extensively throughout the South. But their big break came when they joined Motown in 1966. Under Berry Gordy's famous label, Gladys Knight and the Pips soared, selling millions of records through the late 60s and early 70s. As their star rose, they were invited to tour with other top Motown acts, including the Supremes. As the group's powerful lead singer, Knight naturally commanded attention during performances. But when they opened for the Supremes, things didn't go as she had hoped. Knight later recalled how, after a particularly strong set, their shared road manager approached them with a message. "Mr. Gordy's on the phone for you." In a 2015 interview on Sway's Universe, Knight addressed the long-standing rumor about Ross. She made it clear, while she tries to be kind, she also tells the truth. "We were on tour with the Supremes, doing colleges and venues like that," Knight explained. "We opened for them. One night, after a really good show, I got on the phone and Mr. Gordy said, 'I hear you guys are doing great out there.' I said, 'I hope so, Mr. Gordy.' Then he said, 'But you're giving my star act a little bit of trouble. What's up with that?' I told him, 'We're just doing our thing.' That's when Gordy broke the news. The Pips were headed home. Gladys Knight was caught off guard by Berry Gordy's call. Just before it came, she had noticed something that now made sense in hindsight. Diana Ross peeking out from behind the upper-level theater curtain. It was unusual behavior for Ross, and it left Knight uneasy. I remember him saying, 'Well, I think you guys are coming home.' I said, 'What?' And he repeated it. 'I think you guys are coming home.'" Knight couldn't believe it. The Supremes were already huge stars, among the most admired acts in the world. Why would anyone feel threatened? But the very next day, Gladys Knight and the Pips were off the tour. In that moment, Knight realized just how far Ross was willing to go to protect her spotlight, at any cost. What Knight didn't yet know was that Ross's own bandmates in the Supremes had long been dealing with that same side of her. People often wondered why Ross's colleagues felt the way they did. As Knight put it, "I'm just like you. I have standards. You have a way you want to run your business. I have mine, and I think it works." Without the shield of Motown's PR machine, Ross's demanding nature became an open secret. She made no apologies for it. In her own words, "I demand perfection from myself and the best possible job from all those around me." Some even said her daughter, Tracy Ellis Ross, acted as her eyes and ears, keeping a notebook of employees' missteps. On stage, this need for control sometimes boiled over, like the time at Wembley Arena, when Ross, furious over the sound system, halted the show, yelled at the crew, and kicked a monitor off the stage with a force one reporter compared to a kick from Pelé. At the peak of the Supremes' fame, Ross acknowledged in her memoir Secrets of a Sparrow that she knew how lucky they were to have what they did. "I have always been so grateful to know I could make my life doing what I loved, singing," she wrote. But that same drive strained her relationships, especially with Berry Gordy, and led to an explosive fallout that began with Florence Ballard and rippled through the group, As the Supremes, Diana Ross, Florence Ballard, and Mary Wilson rose to pop stardom. They became icons of sophistication and style. Their polished sound and glamorous image helped them break barriers, but behind the scenes, tensions simmered. Under Motown boss Berry Gordy's direction, Diana Ross quickly became the group's focal point. Gordy believed Ross's delicate vocals and striking looks, though not as powerful as Ballard's voice, gave the group a more universal appeal. This, he felt, helped them cross over to white audiences at a time when mainstream success for black artists was rare. But Gordy's favoring of Ross created friction, especially with Florence Ballard. Ballard, once a standout talent, struggled with the growing imbalance. By 1967, when the Supremes were set to headline at the Flamingo in Las Vegas, tensions had reached a breaking point. Ballard was already on shaky ground, battling personal struggles that included drinking and erratic behavior. When she saw the marquee reading Diana Ross and the Supremes, it was a crushing blow. Ballard reportedly relapsed that night, lashing out at both Gordy and Ross. Those close to her later said it was heartbreaking to witness. Florence seemed like a shadow of the bright young woman she had been. Not long after, Ballard was fired and replaced by Cindy Birdsong. Hoping to make it on her own, Ballard released 2 solo singles, but neither found success. Her label eventually shelved her album. She married Thomas Chapman, and together they had 3 daughters. But life remained hard, and at one point, Ballard found herself on public assistance. By 1975, things briefly looked up. She won an insurance settlement, reunited with Chapman, and returned to the stage, performing at a concert alongside Deadly Nightshade. Sadly, the comeback was short-lived. In February 1976, Florence was hospitalized and died the next day from a blood clot in an artery. She was just 32 years old. According to Peter Benjaminson's 2009 book, The Lost Supreme, The Life of Dream Girl Florence Ballard, Ballard's funeral was held at Detroit's New Bethel Baptist Church and drew an enormous crowd. More than 5,000 mourners gathered, filling the church, the streets, and the sidewalks, all there to pay their final respects to the fallen star. Whether Diana Ross was even invited to the funeral remains unclear, but her arrival caused quite a stir. Ross pulled up in a limousine, stepping out in dramatic fashion. Instead of sympathy, she was met with boos from many in the crowd, upset by what they saw as an unnecessary display. Even Ross's mother, who was present, reportedly looked distressed by the public's reaction. Inside the church, Ross joined Ballard's grieving family in the front pew. She sat down next to Thomas Chapman, Ballard's widower, and gently took his youngest daughter, Lisa, placing the child on her lap. A photographer captured that moment, and the image of Ross and little Lisa became one of the few widely circulated photos from the funeral. Years later, in 2010, Village Voice columnist Michael Musto spoke with writer Mark Bego, who had attended the service. Bego described Ross's entrance as highly theatrical. Flanked by 2 bodyguards, Ross let out a dramatic, sobbing scream as she entered, nearly fainting as the bodyguards carried her to the front. The mourners, already emotional, watched in shock. Reflecting on the scene, Bego remarked, I have never seen such choreography in my life. It felt like the worst act of mock mourning I had ever witnessed. He added pointedly, she wouldn't even allow Florence to be the star of her own funeral. And while Ross's role in Ballard's tragic downfall remains controversial, she wasn't the only one whose actions left lasting scars. The third member of the Supremes, Mary Wilson, eventually experienced her own heartbreak at the hands of Diana Ross. In her 1986 memoir, Wilson reflected on the moment she realized things had started to fall apart between her and the woman she once called a close friend and bandmate. They were doing a great job of elevating Diane, yes, at the expense of the Supremes or using the Supremes, which was me, Wilson wrote, describing how Ross slowly became the focal point of the group while the others were pushed further into the background. According to Wilson, as the group's success grew, so did Ross's determination to stand apart. Ross reportedly began changing her costumes during television appearances, deliberately choosing outfits that made her stand out from Wilson and Florence Ballard. On stage, Ross allegedly positioned herself away from the others so the cameras would naturally focus on her alone. Wilson didn't mince words when describing Ross's behavior. About Diane, that has always been the way she is. Period. Since I knew her at the age of 13, she wants everything herself. Ross's constant need for attention, Wilson said, often left the group feeling uneasy. She craved attention, and in her attempts to get it, she could seem almost ruthless. Sometimes she would throw a childish tantrum, then moments later pretend it was all a big joke, that she was just being silly. Her bluntness could be disconcerting, and feelings were hurt. We saw Diane's actions as the product of thoughtlessness. Adding to the tension was Ross's romantic relationship with Motown boss Berry Gordy. Wilson and Ballard felt that this only widened the divide, as both Ross and Gordy began steering her toward a solo career. Despite Ross's star status, Wilson believed much of Ross's behavior stemmed from deep insecurity. Her haughtiness was just a front, Wilson wrote. Deep down, she believed she wasn't as pretty as the other girls. According to Mary Wilson, Diana Ross's insecurities often fueled her hunger for attention, especially from men. Beyond her well-known relationship with Berry Gordy, Wilson even claimed in her memoir that Ross once tried to seduce Wilson's own boyfriend, a move that only deepened the cracks in their friendship. By 1970, Ross made her much-anticipated break from the Supremes to launch her solo career. Cindy Birdsong stepped in to fill her place, but the tension didn't fade. Despite leaving the group to carve her own path, Ross seemed to hold on to a lingering resentment toward her former bandmates. In one interview, Ross made a pointed remark about Mary Wilson, accusing her of singing her songs, and emphasizing that it was Ross's voice on those tracks, not that of the late Florence Ballard. The comment struck many as unnecessary and cruel, especially given that Ross's own need to dominate the spotlight had been at the root of so much of the group's turmoil. Fans took notice. One person summed it up bluntly. For her to say Mary is singing her songs says it all. She said that as if Mary wasn't even on the track. Still, not everyone blames Ross entirely for how things unraveled. Some believe it was a mix of ambition, circumstance, and plain bad luck. As one observer put it, Di could be a drama queen for sure and had preferred status from Berry, but she proved herself after she left the group. Florence would have been okay. Too bad luck intervened. As unreasonable as it might seem to some, that one fan's perspective may actually have a point. Diana Ross herself, in her memoir Secrets of a Sparrow, reflected on how people often misread her. To some, I probably seem ready to fight, but that's a misinterpretation, Ross wrote. I am simply overcoming my insecurities, which I have been dealing with for years and have learned to cover. The older I get, the better it all feels, but letting it just flow is not yet an easy thing for me, and it never has been. That protective shell, Ross admitted, may have made her misunderstood throughout her career. But when it came to her private life, especially as a mother, there was another side of her, one full of warmth and pride. Tara Borelli described Ross as an exceptional parent, grounded and loving toward her 5 children in a way the public rarely saw. "The greatest gift that my kids give me is the reminder that I'm not so great," Ross humbly confessed. "I'm just ordinary." And yet, for all her private tenderness, the public couldn't always overlook her missteps. Time and again, critics and fans pointed to choices that seemed selfish or ruthless. Many chalked it up to her relationship with Berry Gordy, believing it gave her unfair advantages. As one person bluntly put it online, "When you're sleeping with the boss, you will definitely be the lead singer. Shame on Berry Gordy. He is wrong for pulling Gladys Knight and the Pips off the tour." And so, the cycle continues. Their music, their talent, their legacies will always shine. But for Diana Ross, it seems the shadow of her controversial choices will forever follow close behind. In September 2024, Gladys Knight finally opened up about the truth behind her 38-year feud with Diana Ross, a rivalry that stretched from their early Motown days all the way to 2005. For decades, the tension between these 2 legendary women was kept out of the public eye. It wasn't until Gladys shared the details in her memoir that fans learned what had really gone on behind the scenes. The roots of the feud, according to Knight, went back to when Gladys Knight and the Pips signed with Motown Records and were invited to open for the Supremes on tour. From the start, things felt off. Gladys realized that Diana seemed to resent her, specifically her powerful voice. Knight admitted she was baffled, given that Diana already had all the attention in the world from Mr. Gordy and everyone else. It wasn't long before Berry Gordy himself called Gladys. His message was clear. "Well, I hear you're spoiling my act." Surprised, Gladys insisted, "That's not what we're about. We're just doing our show." But Gordy's mind was made up. He told her, "I think you guys should just come on back home tomorrow." And just like that, Gladys Knight and the Pips were removed from the tour. When asked years later if Diana had ever been outright mean to her, Gladys responded with grace. "Well, I'm not a liar. I know that she wasn't the happiest with me. Let me put it like that." In truth, this wasn't the first time stories circulated about Diana Ross making life difficult for a fellow artist. Some argue that what's been called diva behavior was perhaps just Diana's fierce competitiveness, a quality that drove her to the top, but may have also left many bruised feelings along the way. On the flip side, it's hard to fault Gladys for feeling the way she did. Like anyone else, she deserved respect. What matters now is that these 2 icons eventually put their differences aside, proving that even in the world of legendary old-school rivalries, there's room for peace.